My name is Dijanne Cevaal and I'm from Australia. As a child I embroidered a lot. I used to make many things like puppets and wall hangings, and then I embroidered jeans for my friends when I was a teenager because we had embroidered jeans. And then I went to university and studied, and I was too busy to sew very much. I did a lot of knitting, and I then worked for 10 years as a lawyer. And then when I was pregnant with my first daughter, I thought I should make her a quilt. So I began to make quilts again.
Okay.
I begin all of my pieces with white cloth.
Yeah.
So I dye, I print if it's needed. I use serigraphy techniques, and I like that building process of building the image and creating layers and then finishing it with stitching. Very much inspired by places, and because I travel a lot, I tend to do a lot of work by hand because it's easy to carry with me.
Yeah.
And I've found that those pieces really have started being about places and things that I've encountered in places. So they're like little memories that I collect. When the theme arrived and I started to think about what it meant, la sagesse, for me it was a wider word than wisdom in English. Wisdom in English tends to mean knowledge or acquired things from learning, whereas sagesse suggested to me a much wider principle of a way of approaching life. And I didn't think that I could say very much really about it because I would never call myself wise. I just try and live my life as best as I can. But I had the opportunity to do a residency on a very small island called Eure-et-Loir Island, which is part of East Timor, and it was with a group of women that worked together. They were a cooperative, and I was there to share my skills. And what I learnt more than I think they did, because they would sing in the workplace, and I've never sung so much in my life whilst we were working. And I was teaching them how to make lino cuts and how to expand their stitching repertoire with the machines, which are treadles. And it was a very humble place to be because there's no electricity. Running water doesn't exist. It comes from wells underground, so it has to be carefully used. But the people themselves were amazing. They had been through great hardships in the last 40 or 50 years. They were a prison for the Portuguese. They were, during the Japanese invasion, they were also a prison for Japanese prisoners. And then when the Indonesians invaded in 1975, the Indonesians used it as a prison for all the families of the Fretilin activists who were fighting against the Indonesians. So the population quadrupled, and that was really difficult for a very small island. So they'd been through great hardships, and yet they were still very strong and they had a great sense of humility. They also are Catholic, but they're Catholic in like almost the truest sense of the word. Yes, they attended the Mass on Sundays and they would dress up, but they would sing. And I think this priest, Padre Luis was his name, I think he had the most beautiful choir in the world. So to be there was a really joyful experience, and I thought, well, I've come to share my knowledge, but they've shared so much with me. So is this a path of wisdom? Their way of life was simple, but there were complicated histories. So I say life was simple, but it wasn't really. But yet they found a way to deal with their life in a really good way. So this arrived because it was very hot. It was 33 degrees during the day and 30 degrees at night. So the only time in the day it was cool enough to walk was around sunrise. And the church, the Mass would be on every morning, so I could hear the Mass on the loudspeaker, so I could hear the voices of the singing. But also not everybody went to Mass, of course, and I would go and walk along the beach and watch the sunrise. But there were lots of people doing the same thing They would just quietly sit and take in the sun. It was almost like they were meditating. And so I discovered all these sea urchins on the beach, and I wanted to capture that memory of how that felt in the mornings in the piece that I made. And to me, this suggests everything about Aotearoa Island and what I experienced there. It's a very contemplative process, particularly working by hand. It's a very slow process, so you have to slow down. You have to stop all of the distractions that normally happen in life, the phones, the rushing around, because you actually just have to sit and stitch. And as you sit and stitch, it's a kind of meditation. You lose yourself in the work, and it does acquire a very peaceful aspect because you've got to calm down and slow down.